Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, Shaftesbury Park. It's Mr. Bisnath here, and today I'm going to be reading a story, or a tale rather, called Dragon Castle. Now I hope you enjoy it. Dragon Castle. At Barnbrus by the sea, there looms a dark rock. On this rock stands a castle, and in that castle there once lived a mighty king. This king had a daughter, but no sons. His wife was dead. As the years went by, he grew tired of having only the girl's company by the fireside, and he longed to marry again. So he rode through his realm, searching high and low for a woman fine enough to be his new queen. At last he found a high-born lady who was beautiful, quick-witted, and skilled at the charms of love. She accepted the king's marriage proposal eagerly, too eagerly in the eyes of some. Within days they were celebrating their wedding, and then the queen took her throne beside the king. The king was ecstatically happy, for when the queen poured out his wine each night, she always laced it with a love potion. But the rest of the court found the queen domineering and hard-hearted. They all hated her. The one who hated her most was the queen's new stepdaughter, the princess. The princess had almost grown up by then, and she too was very beautiful. Also, her grace and gentleness were widely admired. The new queen was jealous of her, and because of this, she bullied her. She locked away the princess's jewellery, made her dressed in cast-offs, and sent her away early from the dinner table, so that the poor girl grew pallidly thin. One day, a special feast was held at the castle. All the guests who came in had to swear an oath, praising the king and queen. The nobles and their ladies all queued eagerly at the throne. One by one they fell to their knees and declared, "You are the mightiest king and the fairest lady in all the world. I swear honour to you." Then the king rewarded each with an exquisite gift, a fine sword or a golden ring. At length it was the turn of a handsome youth who no one had ever seen before. In fact, the youth was a stranger in the kingdom, had only gotten into the feast by bribing the guards. He walked to the throne with a jaunty step, and his voice rang out loudly and clearly through the great hall as he declared, "You are the mightiest king in all the world. I swear honour to you." Then he rose to turn to walk without claiming his gift. The king called him back with an angry shout, "Hey there, young man! Wait! Your oath is only half made." The youth made no effort to correct his mistake and brazenly ignored the queen. He walked quickly to a stall in the shadows where the princess was sitting quietly. He bowed deeply to her, then said, "My lady, they call me the young knight of the winds, and I have travelled countless miles to attend this feast, all because of you. For it is true what they say, the queen is not the fairest lady in the world. You are." The princess blushed like a wild rose and gazed up at him in amazement. The king looked too astonished, but the queen leaped from her throne with a piercing shriek. "Guards!" she cried. "Seize the slanderous wretch! Take him down to the beach. As soon as the tide goes out, throw him into a small boat with no oars and set him adrift onto the sea." The guards seized the young knight of the wind and dragged him away. "The feast is cancelled," proclaimed the queen. "All of you, go home and keep your silence. If anyone dares say a word against me, you too shall be banished from this realm." The guests stood up and filed quaking out of the hall. The luscious food on the tables was left untouched. The princess began to weep, and the king went to comfort her. But the queen slapped him away with an angry hiss. "So, you little hussy," the queen spat at the princess, "what do you think of your admirer, eh? He seems both brave and noble, the princess whispered. I can tell you for sure that he is neither, snapped the queen. And what do you think of his judgment? Do you really think you're the fairest lady in the world? That isn't for me to answer, the princess replied. Indeed, the queen said crisply. So, I shall answer it for you, not with words, but with deeds. Behind the throne stood a table laden with treasures. The queen went to it and rummaged through the treasures until she found a small black glass bottle and a silver cup. She pulled the stopper from the bottle and poured a dark liquid into the cup. Then she seized the princess, held the cup to her lips and forced the liquid down her throat. The princess spluttered and gasped. Stop! The king cried, running over to her. He tried to snatch the bottle away, but the queen was too nimble. In God's name, are you trying to poison her? No, said the queen. Not poison. This is witchcraft. Witchcraft? Exclaimed the king in horror. The queen gave a demonic laugh. Watch her, she said, and you will see. The vile brew was already taking effect. The princess withered about, stretching and squirming in agony, and as she did so, her body began to change. Her dress burst from her, her smooth white skin blistered, and the blisters turned to scales. Her hair fell out, horns budded on her head, claws grew from her hands. She fell on all fours. Her body grew elongated, sprouting wings and a quivering tail. The king turned white. At first, he could not speak. Then he said hoarsely, Oh, you evil witch! How I curse the day that I married you. What have you done to my beloved daughter? You must be even more of a fool than I thought, if you need to ask that, the queen retorted. Can't you see with your own eyes? I turned her into a dragon. Meanwhile, the young knight of the winds had been bound, gagged, and cast away on the sea. A fierce storm had blown up as soon as he was set adrift. This too was due to the queen's witchery. At first he feared he would be broken to smithereens on the rocks of the Faroe Islands, but he had been born with luck on his side, and he found himself caught in a current that swept him safely away past the rocks and out onto the open sea. There he had drifted for several days, until at last he was washed up on the distant shores of Norway. Here the queen's spells were too far away to touch him, and he quickly recovered from this ordeal. He offered alliance to the king of that land, and was rewarded with food, a place to sleep in his hall, weapons, armour, and gold. Months passed. The young king of the wind grew taller, stronger, and even bolder. But although he thrived in his new life, he could not settle, for he still thought constantly of the princess. He asked everywhere for news of her. At last he met a traveller, newly sailed from Barbara, who told him, The queen has turned her stepdaughter into a loathsome, flame-breathing dragon. This dragon is causing chaos all over the kingdom. It's eating all the crops, animals, and the people are starving. Also, its fiery breath is burning down all the houses. But the king has many brave warriors in his court, said the young knight of the winds. Why don't they kill this dragon? The king won't allow it, said the traveller, for he can't forget that the dragon was once his beloved daughter. But it seems that the queen will soon overrule him. Due to her witchcraft, she now holds the king completely in her power. She has declared that she will allow the dragon to live in the castle for a year and a day. After that, she'll ignore the king's objections and will have it killed. When the young knight of the wind heard this, he knew that the time to act had come. He also realised that although he was a skilled and valiant warrior, this was not enough to overcome the queen. So, he hurried to the cottage of an old woman who was famed for her wisdom and knowledge of magic. He gave her a purse of the gold he had earned from serving the Norwegian king. Then he begged the old woman to advise him on what to do to save the princess. The old woman took the gold gratefully. She held a candle to the young Knight of the Wind's face and studied him intently in its light. "I can see you're honest," she said at last. "So, I'll give you 3 pieces of advice. First, when you build a new boat to sail home in, make sure you use wood cut from a rowan tree. It's the only kind that's guaranteed to be stronger than witchcraft. Second, when the dragon comes at you, roaring with fire and hatred, your first thought will be to kill it to save your own life. Well, don't. Instead, remind yourself of who the dragon really is. Then, follow your heart. Third, when your deeds are done and the dragon's gone, there will still be one more thing to do. Go to the queen, seize the scepter from her hand, and throw it into the waves. I promise you, you won't be sorry." The old woman shut her mouth abruptly and showed him to the door. The young Knight of the Wind thanked her. Then he hurried away, chopped down a sturdy rowan tree, and crafted it into a boat. As soon as it was finished, he set sail for Bamborough. As he drew nearer, the sea swirled and seethed with the evil spells of the queen. An unnatural wind blew up and lashed the waves, tossing the little boat this way and that way. Thunder rumbled and lightning struck the mast. But the rowan woods held fast and true, and the young Knight of the Wind reached the beach below the castle without coming to any harm. As he landed, he heard a loud bellowing, and the air was filled with the acrid smell of burning. The sand shuddered beneath his feet. The next moment, he was dazzled by the brightness of the fire. Above him, the castle seemed to shake. Its gate opened, and the dragon came slithering out. It stood on the rocks in the bellowing cloud of smoke. Then it spread its wings and soared into the air. Even the bold young Knight of the Wind could not help cowering under its monstrous shadow. 3 times the beast circled him, before it landed in front of him on the beach. The young Knight of the Wind had never faced anything so huge, loathsome, and ugly. Never in any battle had he felt such fear. He was overwhelmed by a desire to kill it. He gripped his sword and crept towards it, aiming the blade at the monster's heart. The dragon opened its vast mouth and bleached out flames, watching him with red, bulbous eyes. But at that moment, the wise woman's words came back to him. The young Knight of the Wind turned his gaze from the dragon, and in his mind's eye he conjured up a picture of his beloved princess. Oh, how lovely she had been before the queen bewitched her, how gentle and graceful. With trembling hands, he forced himself to put away his sword. He inched closer. The dragon stood stock still. The young Knight of the Wind sweated her under its fiery breath. He choked at its stench. Still, closer he came. He put out his hands, he brushed his fingers against its warty scale, and moved even nearer. Thinking of the princess, he put his lips to the dragon's scaly skin, and 3 times he kissed it. On the 3rd kiss, the dragon suddenly jutted away from him. Its fire fizzed out in a rush of cold air. It began to shrivel and shrink. Its skin collapsed as if its bones were crumbling. The sand gave way beneath it, and the beast sank into the gaping hole. Storm clouds rushed across the sky and blanked out the sun. Then a wind sent the sand spiraling up into the air, until the young Knight of the Wind was almost blinded. When it cleared, he saw a pale figure emerging from the hole, luminous in the stormlight. Then he knew for sure that the evil spell had been broken, for it was a princess. She ran to the young Knight of the Wind. He caught her arms, and they embraced. As they did so, a crowd of courtiers Servants, noble ladies, and warriors came swarming from the castle and cheering down onto the beach. At the head of the throng stood the king. He was overjoyed as the young knight of the wind to see the loathsome dragon gone and the princess back in her true shape. He offered the young knight the princess's hand in marriage and half his fortune too. The young knight was eager to accept, and so was the princess. But before they could shake hands on it, the cheering crowd fell silent, for the evil queen had come down to the beach. The queen raised her hands and began to mutter the words of another venomous spell, but the young knight of the winds knew now that his will was stronger than hers. He strode up to her, snatched the scepter out from her hands as the wise woman had advised him, and hurled it into the sea. At once the queen was devoured from inside by her own witchery. She began to spin around so fast that no one could follow her. When the spinning finally slowed and then stopped, the queen had gone. In her place was a crouched and ugly croaking toad. And that was the end of the queen. All her powers of witchery were dead. In her toad shape, she crawled to a damp ditch. There she had to lurch, piteous and despised, living on flies and beetles until she died. As for the young knight of the wind and the princess, they got married without delay, and very happy they were too. When the princess's father grew too old to reign, the young knight of the wind became the new king, and everyone said that he ruled the land with great generosity and wisdom. Right, I hope you guys enjoyed that story, and I hope you enjoy this week. Okay. All the best, take care.